You walk into a room and immediately know who's lying. Not because of their body language or what they're saying, but because something deeper whispers the truth to you. You dream about your friend's breakup 3 weeks before it happens. The images are so vivid, you wake up with their pain in your chest. But when you try to warn them, they brush it off as coincidence. You avoid certain people at work because they make your skin crawl, though everyone else thinks they're nice. 3 months later, you find out they've been embezzling money. You sit in meetings and watch the unspoken dynamics play out like a movie. Who really holds the power? Who's planning to quit? Which projects will fail before anyone's even admitted there's a problem? And when you try to explain any of this, they look at you like you've lost your mind. If this sounds familiar, you might be what Carl Jung called the most dangerous personality type to be born with. Not dangerous to others, dangerous to yourself. Jung spent decades studying what he termed intuitive introverts, people whose minds operate like psychic antennas, picking up signals from dimensions most people can't even perceive. In his clinical interviews, he described meeting patients who could walk into a room and immediately know intimate details about a stranger's psychology, who could sense the emotional undercurrents of any situation with uncanny accuracy, who lived their entire lives feeling like they were inhabitants of 2 worlds simultaneously. But here's what the YouTube psychology channels won't tell you about this supposed gift. It comes with a curse so devastating that Jung called it one of the most difficult lives a person could live. You see, while everyone else gets to live in one reality, the concrete observable world of facts and logic, you're forced to navigate 2 realities simultaneously. There's the world everyone else sees, and then there's the shadow world you perceive. The world of hidden motives, future possibilities, and archetypal patterns that play out beneath the surface of ordinary life. And the psychological toll of this double existence, it's staggering. You start to question which reality is real. You begin to wonder if you're crazy. You learn to stay silent about what you see because sharing it only leads to isolation and misunderstanding. But silence becomes its own prison because the visions don't stop. The insights don't pause. The overwhelming flood of unconscious information continues to pour through your mind every single day, and you have nowhere to put it. And if you don't learn to navigate this properly, it will slowly eat you alive from the inside. Today, we're going far beyond surface-level personality typing. We're diving into Jung's actual clinical observations about why intuitive introverts often end up isolated, misunderstood, and questioning their own sanity. We're exploring the specific psychological traps that await this type and why so many gifted individuals end up broken by their own gifts. More importantly, we're exploring the 3-stage journey every intuitive introvert must navigate to transform their greatest weakness into their most powerful strength. Because the difference between thriving and barely surviving, as this type, isn't about learning to trust your intuition. It's about learning to survive it without losing yourself in the process. To understand why this type is so dangerous to possess, we need to understand exactly how your mind works differently from everyone else's. Carl Jung identified 4 basic psychological functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. Most people rely heavily on sensation, what they can see, hear, touch, and measure. Their reality is grounded in the immediate, the provable, the concrete. But for the intuitive introvert, sensation is the weakest function. Instead, your dominant function is what Jung called introverted intuition, and this is where things get psychologically dangerous. Jung described introverted intuition as perception via the unconscious. While other people's minds skim across the surface of reality, yours plunges directly into the depths. You don't just see what is, you see what's beneath what is. The hidden patterns, the archetypal structures, the collective unconscious content that most people never access. In Jung's own words, introverted intuition is directed upon the inner object, meaning the elements of the unconscious mind itself. You're literally perceiving psychological realities that don't have physical form, but are more real than anything in the material world. Think about that for a moment. Your primary way of understanding reality is through a function that most people don't even know exists. While they're asking, "What happened?" You're asking, "What What does this mean? While they're focused on facts, you're tracking the invisible forces that create those facts. While they're living in the present, you're seeing 3 moves ahead in the cosmic chess game. Jung described this beautifully when he said that for the intuitive introvert, inner objects appear to the intuitive perception as subjective images of things, which, though not to be met with in external experience, really determine the contents of the unconscious. Translation: you see the blueprints of reality before reality builds itself. But here's where the danger begins. Because sensation is your weakest function, you have very little anchor to the present moment. You struggle to stay grounded in your body, in concrete reality, in the here and now. Your attention is constantly being pulled toward the symbolic realm, the world of meanings and possibilities and archetypal patterns. This creates what Jung called an extraordinary aloofness from tangible reality. You become, in his words, a complete enigma to your immediate circle. And this is just the beginning of the problems. You see, when your mind operates primarily in the realm of symbols and unconscious content, 3 specific psychological traps are waiting for you. Wrote. Traps that Jung observed repeatedly in his clinical practice. Traps that can transform your greatest gift into a source of profound suffering. The first trap is what Jung called archetypal inflation. The second is what modern psychology recognizes as psychic contamination. And the third is the most dangerous of all, what Jung described as possession by the unconscious. Over the next 15 minutes, we're going to explore each of these traps in detail. We're going to understand exactly how they develop, why they're so seductive, and most importantly, how to navigate them without losing your sanity or your gifts. Because Jung discovered something remarkable in his work with intuitive introverts. Those who learn to navigate these traps don't just survive their psychological complexity. They become some of the most transformative figures in human history. Every intuitive introvert's journey follows the same 3 stages, whether they realize it or not. Stage 1 is the gift, the early discovery of your intuitive abilities and the intoxicating sense of seeing what others cannot see. Stage 2 is the curse. When that gift becomes overwhelming, isolating, and potentially destructive. Stage 3 is the integration, learning to channel your abilities without being consumed by them. Most people get stuck in stage 2. Today, we're going to understand why and how to move beyond it. Stage 1 typically begins in childhood or adolescence, but some people don't recognize it until much later in life. It's that moment when you first realize your mind works differently. Maybe you're the kid who always knows when adults are lying. Maybe you're the teenager who can predict which couples will break up just by watching them interact for 5 minutes. Maybe you're the young adult who keeps having dreams that come true, or who gets feelings about people that are always accurate. At first, this feels incredible. You feel chosen, special, like you've been given a secret superpower that most people don't possess. Jung observed this pattern repeatedly in his practice. He described meeting a young woman who told him within the first few minutes of their session intimate details about his own psychology that she couldn't possibly have known through conventional means. She wasn't trying to impress him. She was simply describing what she saw when she looked at him. This is the seductive power of introverted intuition. You don't just meet people, you see through them. You don't just observe situations, you understand their hidden dynamics instantly. You don't just live life, you perceive the archetypal patterns that govern everyone's behavior. In stage 1, this feels like having X-ray vision for the human soul. You can walk into any room and immediately sense who has real power, who's pretending, who's in pain, who's dangerous. You can predict outcomes before anyone else sees the signs. You can understand people better than they understand themselves, and for a while, this seems like pure gift. But Jung noticed something disturbing about people in this stage. They often develop what he called a dangerous contempt for the outer world. Because their inner perceptions are so rich and accurate, they begin to dismiss concrete reality as somehow inferior or irrelevant. Why focus on mundane details when you can see cosmic patterns? Why pay attention to surface conversations when you can perceive the unconscious dynamics beneath them? Why ground yourself in the present when you can live in the realm of pure meaning? This is where the first crack in the foundation appears, because sensation, your connection to the body, to the present moment, to concrete reality, begins to atrophy. You start living more and more in your head in the world of symbols and possibilities and future visions. You become what Jung described as extraordinarily aloof from tangible reality. And slowly, very slowly, you begin to notice that your gift is creating problems in your relationships. Friends get uncomfortable when you see through their facades. Family members accuse you of being too intense or reading too much into things. Romantic partners feel exposed, like they can't hide anything from you. And that level of transparency becomes suffocating for them. You start to realize that while your insights are accurate, sharing them often damages your connections with others. People don't want to be understood that deeply. They don't want their unconscious motivations revealed. They don't want their future problems predicted. So, you begin to learn the first survival skill of the intuitive introvert, silence. You start keeping your perceptions to yourself. You learn to nod and smile when people tell you things you already knew. You develop a social mask that hides the depth of what you're actually seeing. But this creates a new problem because now you're living a double life. Your inner world of rich, meaningful perceptions and your outer world of pretending to be normal. And the pressure of maintaining this double existence begins to build. Jung called this the great disadvantage of the intuitive introvert. He said they learn to keep things to themselves and you hardly ever hear them talking of these things. That is a great disadvantage, but it is an enormous advantage in another way. The advantage, your perceptions become even more refined when you're forced to process them internally. The disadvantage, you begin to feel profoundly alone in the world. And this loneliness, the sense of living between worlds, sets the stage for stage 2. Because when your gift becomes your prison, when your greatest strength becomes your source of deepest isolation, the psychological dangers Jung warned about begin to emerge. Stage 2 is where most intuitive introverts get stuck. It's where the gift transforms into a curse, and where Jung's darkest warnings about this type become reality. By this stage, you've learned to keep your perceptions to yourself. You've developed the social skills necessary to function in the outer world, but internally, you're drowning in a flood of unconscious content that has nowhere to go. Jung identified 3 specific psychological traps that emerge during this stage. Each one is seductive. Each one promises relief from the burden of your consciousness. And each one can destroy you if you don't understand what's happening. The first trap Jung called archetypal inflation. This happens when your ego begins to identify with the powerful archetypal content you're perceiving. Remember, as an intuitive introvert, you have direct access to what Jung called the collective unconscious, the shared psychological patterns that govern all human behavior. You see the archetypal roles people play: the mother, the father, the hero, the sage, the destroyer. But in stage 2, something dangerous happens. Instead of simply perceiving these archetypes, you begin to identify with them. You start to see yourself as the wise one who understands when others cannot see. You become the prophet who perceives truths that the masses are too blind to recognize. You transform into the wounded healer who must sacrifice their own well-being to help an unconscious world. Jung saw this pattern repeatedly. He described patients who became convinced they were receiving special messages from the universe, who believed they had been chosen for sacred missions, who developed a sense of grandiose specialness that separated them from ordinary humanity. And here's the insidious part. Your perceptions are still accurate. You are seeing things others miss. You do understand patterns they can't recognize. But your ego has become inflated by this knowledge, and you lose the ability to distinguish between your human self and the archetypal content flowing through you. This is what Jung meant when he warned about possession by the unconscious. You stop being a person who perceives archetypal patterns and become someone who believes they are the archetype. The second trap is what modern psychology calls psychic contamination, though Jung described it in different terms. Because your intuitive function is so sensitive to unconscious content, you don't just perceive other people's psychological patterns, you absorb them. Your boundaries between self and other become permeable, almost dissolving. You walk into a room and not only sense that someone is depressed, you become depressed. You don't just recognize that your friend is anxious about their relationship, their anxiety becomes your anxiety. You don't just perceive your family's dysfunction, you take responsibility for healing it. Jung observed that intuitive introverts often lose the ability to distinguish between their own psychological content and the psychological content they're perceiving in others. You become what he called a psychic sponge, absorbing the emotional and unconscious material of everyone around you. This creates a devastating secondary problem. You begin to lose your sense of individual identity. Because you're so attuned to everyone else's inner world, you forget what belongs to you and what belongs to them. You start taking responsibility for other people's pain. You feel guilty for problems you didn't create. You exhaust yourself trying to heal wounds that aren't yours. You become addicted to being needed because being needed feels like the only way to justify your overwhelming sensitivity. But the cost is enormous. You disappear into other people's stories and your own life becomes secondary to everyone else's psychological drama. The third trap is the most dangerous of all. The complete breakdown of your ability to distinguish between symbolic reality and concrete reality. By stage 2, you spent years living primarily in the world of symbols, meanings, and archetypal patterns. Your connection to sensation, to your body, to the present moment, to concrete facts has become so underdeveloped that you begin to lose touch with consensual reality entirely. Jung described meeting patients who could no longer tell the difference between a symbolic vision and a literal prediction, who interpreted every synchronicity as a personal message from the universe, who lived in a constant state of magical thinking where everything was meaningful and nothing was random. This is what Jung meant when he said the intuitive introvert faces the danger of falling victim to the shadow. Your greatest gift, the ability to perceive the invisible, becomes your greatest weakness. When you can no longer distinguish between what's symbolically true and what's literally true, you start seeing conspiracies where there are only coincidences. You interpret ordinary events as cosmic signs. You lose the ability to engage with practical reality because symbolic reality has become more compelling. And at this point, you face a crucial choice. You can surrender to the chaos, allowing yourself to be completely consumed by the unconscious content flowing through you. Or you can begin the difficult work of integration. Most people choose surrender because integration seems impossible. How do you honor your perceptions without being possessed by them? How do you maintain your sensitivity without losing your sanity? How do you stay true to your gift without destroying your life? This is where stage 3 begins. The stage Jung reserved for the rare individuals who learn to dance with their demons instead of being devoured by them. Stage 3 is where the real work begins. It's where you learn to be a bridge between worlds instead of a victim of your own consciousness. Jung believed that successfully integrated intuitive introverts had the potential to become some of the most transformative figures in human history. Why? Because they could access unconscious content that most people never perceive. But they could also translate that content into forms that others could understand and use. But integration requires mastering 3 specific skills that most psychology channels never discuss. These aren't feel-good affirmations or surface-level coping strategies. These are psychological technologies that Jung developed through decades of clinical work with this type. The first skill is learning to deliberately develop your weakest function, sensation. This isn't about suppressing your intuition. It's about creating an anchor to concrete reality that allows your intuition to function safely. Jung observed that unintegrated intuitive introverts live almost entirely in their heads. They lose connection to their bodies, to the present moment, to the physical world. This makes them vulnerable to being swept away by unconscious content. The reality anchoring practice involves developing what Jung called conscious relationship with the inferior function. Every day you deliberately engage with the physical world in ways that strengthen your connection to sensation. This might mean a daily walking meditation where you focus entirely on your feet touching the ground, regular physical exercise that brings you into your body, cooking meals where you pay attention to textures, smells, and tastes, gardening where you literally work with earth and growing things. But here's the crucial part. You're not trying to become a sensation type. You're creating a stable foundation that allows your intuition to operate without overwhelming you. Jung described this as the marriage of opposites. Your sensation function becomes the container that holds your intuitive insights, preventing them from flooding your consciousness chaotically. The second skill is learning to translate your perceptions into forms that others can understand and use. This is what Jung called giving form to the formless. Most intuitive introverts keep their insights trapped in their inner world because they don't know how to communicate what they see. But integration requires finding ways to bring your perceptions into the outer world through concrete expression. For some, this means artistic expression, painting the visions, writing the stories, composing the music that captures the archetypal patterns you perceive. For others, it means intellectual translation, turning your insights into frameworks, theories, or practical wisdom that others can apply. The key is finding your unique form of translation. Jung himself did this through his psychological theories. He took his direct experience of archetypal content and transformed it into concepts like the collective unconscious, the shadow, and the process of individuation. But translation serves a dual purpose. It doesn't just help others understand your perceptions. It helps you integrate them. When you give form to your insights, they stop being chaotic inner experiences and become structured, manageable knowledge. Think of it as developing a pressure release valve for your consciousness. Instead of accumulating endless amounts of unconscious content with nowhere to put it, you create channels through which that content can flow outward constructively. The third skill is the most crucial: learning to maintain healthy psychological boundaries while staying open to unconscious content. Jung observed that intuitive introverts often swing between two extremes: complete openness that leads to psychic contamination, or complete closure that cuts them off from their gifts. Integration requires finding the middle path. The boundary framework involves developing what Jung called conscious permeability. You learn to consciously choose when to open to unconscious content and when to close yourself off from it. This means developing specific practices for psychic protection. Before entering overwhelming social situations, you might visualize protective barriers around your energy field. After intense interactions, you create cleansing rituals that help you release absorbed psychological material. But the framework also involves learning to distinguish between different types of perceptions. You develop the ability to recognize when an insight is genuinely intuitive versus when it's projection, anxiety, or wishful thinking. Jung called this developing conscious discrimination. You become able to sort through the constant stream of unconscious content flowing through your awareness and identify what's genuinely valuable versus what's psychological noise. Most importantly, you learn to maintain your individual identity while engaging with archetypal content. You can perceive the archetypal patterns without identifying with them. You can understand other people's psychological dynamics without taking responsibility for healing them. You develop what Jung called standpoint, a stable sense of self that can engage with the unconscious without being overwhelmed by it. When these three skills come together, something remarkable happens. Your sensitivity transforms from a burden into a genuine gift, not just for you, but for everyone whose life you touch. You become what Jung called a bridge between the conscious and unconscious worlds. You can access insights that others miss, but you can also communicate those insights in ways that help and heal rather than overwhelm or confuse. You develop the ability to see patterns and possibilities while staying grounded in practical reality. You can offer profound guidance while maintaining healthy boundaries. You can live authentically as yourself while honoring the archetypal content that flows through you. And perhaps most importantly, you stop feeling like an alien in your own life. You find your people, other integrated intuitive introverts who understand your experience. You discover your purpose, the unique way you're meant to translate unconscious wisdom for the world. If you've recognized yourself in this journey, if you felt the loneliness of stage 1, the overwhelming chaos of stage 2, or the hope of stage 3, you're not alone. Jung estimated that intuitive introverts make up less than 2% of the population, but their impact on human consciousness is disproportionate to their numbers. Every major breakthrough in psychology, spirituality, art, and human understanding has come from individuals who could perceive what others couldn't see. But here's what I want you to understand. Your sensitivity is not a flaw to be fixed. Your intensity is not a problem to be solved. Your ability to see beyond a surface is not a burden to be endured. It's a responsibility to be embraced and a gift to be integrated. The world needs people who can perceive the invisible patterns that govern human behavior. We need individuals who can access the collective unconscious and translate its wisdom into forms that help our species evolve. We need bridges between the world of meaning and the world of action. But only if you learn to do this work consciously, deliberately, and with proper psychological protection. So here's my question for you. Which stage are you currently in? Are you in stage 1, discovering the intoxicating power of your perceptions, but noticing the first cracks in your relationships? Are you in stage 2, feeling overwhelmed by the constant flood of unconscious content and struggling to maintain your sanity? Or are you beginning stage 3, ready to do the integration work that transforms your curse into a genuine gift? Share your experience in the comments below. What's the most accurate intuitive hit you've ever had? What's the most frustrating part about being this type in a world that doesn't understand sensitivity? What specific challenges are you facing in learning to navigate your consciousness? Your story might be exactly what another intuitive introvert needs to hear. Because the path of integration is easier when we walk it together, when we know we're not the only ones struggling with the burden and beauty of seeing too much. And if this exploration has resonated with you, if you want to dive even deeper into Jung's understanding of the psyche and the process of individuation, make sure you watch the next video because we're going to explore the shadow work practices that Jung developed specifically for highly sensitive individuals, the ones that most self-help gurus get dangerously wrong. Until then, protect your sensitivity, honor your perceptions, and remember, the world needs what you can see, but only if you learn to see it without losing yourself in the process.